We are having our discussion just before drinks, so I know what you're looking forward to. Hey, we're going to talk about HR, AI, and Personio. Maybe to start, Hanno, can you let us know what Personio and you have been up to in the last year or so?
So quick background for everyone that doesn't know Personio. Over the last 10 years, we built Europe's leading HR and payroll platform for small and mid-sized companies. So essentially helping startups from the get-go, but all the way up to organizations with a few thousand employees, supporting the entire employee lifecycle, supporting them automate their people processes, supporting them get insights into people data, and providing them with abilities to run their payroll. And of course, that started in a world pre the AI revolution, which we're going to talk about in a second. But the pillars that we've provided value to our customers have, of course, only expanded with AI across the same dimensions.
Great. How are you using AI yourself within Personio?
Yeah, so as many companies, of course, there's always two dimensions where AI has changed the business. One is what can you do different and better for your customers, and the other is what are you doing internally. I think internally for us it's been a mix of a top-down and bottoms-up motion. So we've done a lot of culture. We're 1,500 people, so there's a lot of cultural change that needs to happen, a lot of enablement, a lot of pushing people to experiment with AI across the board, and then incentivizing them. We've run AI search weeks where we've just kind of really got people essentially in little hackathons for teams to identify local solutions where they can identify their work more easy. And then there's top-down areas where we've identified, and not surprisingly, the big three areas are coding, our customer service, and our marketing or go-to-market engine, where we've top-down with our systems team centrally both identified solutions we want to use, but also then top-down help those companies, those parts of our company to automate their process in a more effective way. But these were the areas where we've seen the biggest impact.
And what has been the result? Have you seen tangible improvements in productivity?
Yes, so improvements are tangible, but it's always, I think, there was a panel I was on earlier today where it was a little bit about also demystifying, and I think the reality is, yes, there's a lot of value that is happening also inside Personio, and mostly when you listen to what the headlines say or what on earnings calls are being said, of course, we're not yet there that 90% of customer service just happens automatically. We are in a world where you can automate a lot that you couldn't before, and that percentage keeps increasing, and both through models getting better and the application inside companies, and we are, of course, constantly tweaking ourselves. And then there's limitations of what we can do. But I think the biggest areas we've seen is on customer service, we've been able to roll out much more of automated service to a wider part of our user base. We've been able to make these service agents a lot more productive in terms of the amount of tickets they can do. So far, we've not used that to reduce the service team or service cost, but to give more value to our customers. And equally also on the product side, that we've been able to both not just code faster with using tools like Cursor and so on, but also just the whole process up front, because the development process, of course, is not just how long it takes to ship code to production, but everything up front from making the prototypes, testing it with customers. That entire cycle has massively accelerated for us.
That's fantastic. And more to go, I guess, right?
More to come.
So what are the key workflows that you are trying to automate within an HR department? So Personio is the key tool that people use in an HR department. Well, what are the key workflows that you can automate with AI?
Yeah. So I think when I think about AI inside of our product, there's two ways I look about it. The one is, what are areas we can use AI to provide more value to customers? And it's funny that recently when we did, around a year ago, when we did a bit of our updated AI strategy inside our product, and we thought about where can we provide value to our customers, and we then were whiteboarding all kinds of things. And at some point, I realized what was on our whiteboard was, from a pillars perspective of where we deliver value, very similar to our seed pitch deck from 2015, because the value pillars of an HR platform, what we deliver and promise our customers, is automation, is customization to their own needs, and is providing insights into their data. And what we essentially can do with AI is the same pillars, but in a supercharged way. So when you think about automating, you can now smartly automate processes in a much more powerful way. So think about a maternity request of someone leaving or parental leave, which always was part of Personio, and there was always a part of that workflow already happening in our software. But now, by adding agentic use cases on top, we can expand that workflow going into governmental systems and helping other systems around around our platform to also automate these workflows. When you go into the area of customization, where we used to be able to just, you have to customize a lot more manually, and we now have the ability with AI to bring customization and personalization of the platform to an entire new level by understanding more deeply how the customer and the organization works. And when you think about insights, you can go to a much more proactive way of insights instead of giving customers the ability to pull all kinds of reports and give all these overviews. You can actually provide them proactively with insights by you or your AI agent comping the data and then identifying, oh, there's an attrition rate spike in that department, you should have a look here, and thereby really sending the customers towards these areas. So it's the same three pillars of automation, of giving customers more ability to customize and providing insights into their data, but upgraded with AI across the board. And then I think there's a third one, and that might be applicable for founders also beyond HR software, and that is whenever you have users that are not as technical per nature, which a lot of HR managers aren't, you sometimes might have the frustration that you feel there's a lot of value in your product that users never access because they're just not technical enough, and things that maybe you and I or many here in the audience would find very easy to do within Personio might not come as natural. And therefore I think the additional thing on top with agentic AI is that you can have an entire new interaction layer or interface to work with your tool, and thereby giving your customers the ability with natural language to interact, to ask questions, to ask to build a workflow and these kind of things. You just democratize a lot much bigger part of your product towards your customers. And that's, I think, another one that we've seen.
Is AI and Personio changing the way the job of an HR person and maybe even the structure of an HR department?
So I think the structure of the HR departments by jobs stays similar, but I think but of course the shift of type of work from HR departments typically being very operational and spending a lot of time on manual processes to becoming a lot more strategic and having more time to actually work on the organization structure, identifying, using these insights to have discussions with other leaders in the organization about what needs to change, what needs to happen. I think all of that just continues to up-level the organization if done right and if used right. So I do think there's a real opportunity. And of course there's an opportunity for organizations also on some of that manual tasks to save costs and be more efficient and run the company overall more efficiently.
Makes sense. AI in many industries is kind of changing the structure of the landscape. Can OpenAI do the job of an HR system like Personio at some point? And what will be the role of AI first competitors that you may encounter?
Yeah, I mean, so of course, as every founder of a scaled company, if you're in a big market and you've built a somewhat sizable company, you realize there's a lot of other companies also want to go after that price. So I think competition is real, and it's also a good thing because it keeps you on our toes and it keeps you really sharp. That being said, I think there's also, and so I would never underestimate any competition, and I think never becoming complacent is really important here. That said, I think there's also sometimes that little bit overblown risk that now the model companies or hyperscalers will just go and disrupt every part of the business, which I don't think will be the case. The same way how Amazon and Google and others in a pre-AI world build a lot of things. And yes, if you were to build your own Google like Slides product, Microsoft and Google probably going to come after you because it's such a horizontal, such a big category that's worth for them to enter. But if you are building, in our case, HR software or legal software or something like that, those are still vertical categories that even if they're for you as a startup billion-dollar revenue opportunities, they might just not be large enough, interesting enough for these large companies to go into and to build a nuanced product for that space, and then also build the go-to-market motion behind that. So I don't think that you should think about model companies that replacing everything, but of course everything they can do in a very horizontal way, they will do, and I think that's the same way to think about what was in the past areas where Microsoft, Google, and so on have been disrupting, and what are areas where a startup would have just not stand a chance. And I think those areas will also in the future be disrupted. But I think there'll be many areas where, not just for small startups, but you can build multi-billion-dollar companies that are not relevant for that. And then to your second question on AI native companies, I'm sure there's many more in the audience here building that. I think they have a much more likely shot than the hyperscaler to go after that. That said, I think what is also sometimes underestimated when it comes to now vibe coding, enterprise software or other products. Of course, I can very quickly with Lovable or Cursor or other tools build a first simple version that covers a basic workflow. I think the real value, and of course, if you are an enterprise solution that is that simple, you're probably going to be disrupted very quickly. Yeah. But likely, if you're a sizable business that has built some moat around you, then it's not just because you've built something that can be so quickly rebuilt with a Cursor or something like that, because you've actually spent, in our case, 10 years understanding every intricate detail that your customers need to solve that problem for them. And I think that's something that won't go away. So understanding your customers and having a large scale with 15,000 customers that we get feedback from every day, and even for a feature that's around in our product for 8 years, we still start to learn, okay, there's other edge cases as you go into this new industry or whatever, and then maybe you have to rewrite that entire absence management engine again after 5 years because you now learned all these things and you want to do it more powerful. And I think that won't go away. So I'm sure like software cycles will go quicker, but what won't go away is really deeply understanding the customer needs and then being able to solve them over time.
Yeah, I asked you the same question in a different way a little while ago when we spoke privately, and that was, if you had to build the Personio product today anew, would you take a different approach with AI? And your answer was actually not that much. We would kind of build what we have today.
Yeah, and I'm sure we would be able to build it faster and get faster to where we are now to some extent. But fundamentally, a lot of the building blocks still need to be there, especially given that in a regulated space like HR, you can't or don't want to have an LLM figure out dream up your vacation balance or something. You need to follow certain rules, you need to follow certain regulations, and those need to be strong workflows based on a really consistent database that you can do. And then there's a bunch of really smart areas where agents and LLMs have a way to play in there. But I think the foundation won't go away, and that's what you still will need in the future.
You have been building Personio now for the last 10 years or so. What are the key lessons that you've learned in scaling the business?
So I think what definitely also won't go away, I mean, a lot of the companies now growing incredibly fast. It's at some point you'll even as an AI company, as we see with some of the companies where we're all now seeing incredibly fast, they're also growing now in headcount, and that creates complexity. And I think that is something which is, especially as you grow really hard, really fast, is always hard to manage. Of course, in an ideal world, you would not build up organizational debt and you just build a perfect organization even through that phase. The reality is also in our times when we grew at scale 120% plus from 50 to 100, 150 million, during that times you build up technical debt, you build up organizational debt, and you build up strategic debt. And if I would be able to do it again, I'm sure I would have a lot of learnings of mistakes I would avoid, but I'm also pretty sure that there's a lot of things that you just can't as fully comprehend in that moment or have even time to figure that out, and then you still go into several strategic areas that maybe are do too quickly because you just get overexcited, or you build organizational structures that duplicate each other. So I think it is really important to think about also at a startup, and you see that with much more successful companies than Personio, that you go through really fast growth stages, and then you go to areas where you then take these learnings, consolidate some of the pay back your debt, whether it's organizational debt, whether it's your technical debt, whether it's your strategic debt, and then set yourself out for the next stage of growth. I think that's a really important learning. And then just one that comes to mind as we talk about organization design and also about the people you hire. I think one thing that, of course, as you get bigger, you really need senior people that have done things before, but I think there's a fallacy I've realized recently that you can fall into, is when you get to a certain size and a certain brand, you have the ability to attract some of these really amazing talent that have done exactly what you need before in 2-3 other companies that you really admire. It can easily happen that you then say, oh, I now want to grow from 300 to a million to a billion, and they've done that 3 times before, so I'll pick that person that is now just at Stripe or Databricks or whatever at north of $1 billion, and I'll bring them in to run enablement or something else for us again. The problem is that if they've gone through that journey, especially several times, then they're not going to come back to like, oh, this is how it was for me 5 or 6 years ago, but they come with their mindset of, this is how an enablement function looks today. And then they often might, don't want to do the hands-on work required anymore at that stage that you actually have to go back to if you go back to a couple $100 million versus $1 billion. And also you sometimes then build a much more complex organization or structures or processes that are right for $1 billion but not for 300 million. So I think it's really important to realize that while it is critical to bring people with experience, there is a point where some people, while they still accept the job in you and they think they might want to do it again, they're no longer the right part for doing that journey again, and might actually create more complexity than if you bring someone that has to figure it out in the first time.
It makes total sense. Well, what have you yourself learned about leadership over the last 10 years?
More lessons than would fit in any talk, of course. But I think some of the key ones, as a founder, I'm sure many have that as well. That you can continuously think a dream about the future, think about the additional things you can be doing, and that of course then brings new ideas, new initiatives you want to launch. And that is important. That's part of your role as a founder and a CEO also of a scaled company. But then also, as you're leading a much bigger company of hundreds or thousands of people, you realize that you can also overload that organization, and then a lot of the core things that you want to actually get done, you might cripple because of all your new ideas that you add on top. And therefore, I think balancing how many new exciting things you push for and get the organization rallied up for, with what can the organization actually handle in any given time. I think that is hard to grasp, especially because it's in the beginning. You see that very literally. You have a couple tens of people, and if you at some point realize, okay, we can't do anything more. But as the organization gets bigger, it's much harder to find that balance, and I think that's a key piece for you to figure out and learn.
Yeah, one element of that is international expansion, right? So you are now in half a dozen to a dozen countries in Europe. What has been your geographical expansion strategy?
Yeah, I think that's one of these examples where it's easy to, once you scale and you have some traction in other markets, to say, okay, let's go all in all markets. And there's companies or sectors where that makes total sense and where you should go as quickly as possible in all markets. But there's also sectors like ours that's where every market is a lot more different, and then you should really think hard: is there more similarity in a certain type of customers across more markets, or more different types of customers in the same market? And then there's no right or wrong answer, and I think we've got it right in some markets, and some markets we went too fast by not being quite ready for that and not having fully understood what that same customer that works really well for us in this market requires in the other market. And I think that's something where it's really important to not just then go all in and say, oh, we do now the big international expansion and we build a big team here and hire all these people, and then, but really discipline yourself, even if you have a lot of resources, if things go really well, that you're not taking that as a reason to just go all out in all markets, but deliberately act like a startup again, start a new market, learn from it, see how it's going, and then invest behind it based on these learnings. And I think that's something which definitely an international expansion pays off, and the markets where we've done like that turned out to be much more successful.
And I guess in the case of Personio, it's extra hard because we have two products, right? Essentially HR and payroll. So that's another dimension that goes through the whole thing.
Yeah, payroll for us, of course, is a specific one where every country is even more different than in the HR space, and that requires also the additional one. But also then has the benefit if you are really locked in, and that's also something where it's really important to figure out the category. There's some companies where you can only sell to a certain part of any given market, and then you have to internationalize a lot quicker to a lot more markets to become at some point a sizable company. And then there's categories where, like in ours, we sell to pretty much every organization that has employees. We have startups, traditional companies, but also soccer clubs using our product and so on. And if you have that kind of company, that means one market alone can be north of $1 billion in revenue opportunity. And it's really important to discipline yourself to not just try to be 3% in all kinds of markets, but be 20% market leader in a few markets before you go to the next ones.
Makes sense. From a personal perspective, building a company like Personio is like running a marathon, right? This is a big job that happens over a long period of time. But however, from a day-to-day perspective, everything feels like a sprint. So you got to do this, you got to do that. But you cannot sprint a marathon. So how have you yourself kind of found that balance?
I think it's, of course, there's certain physical limits that you feel yourself. I've luckily never went as far that I went over these limits, which is also not uncommon. It's really important to realize those. But I think for especially in periods where things go incredibly well and you grow really fast, and it's almost you get so much adrenaline and so much energy from it that you can literally, you're unbreakable. And then there's periods that are in every journey a bit more difficult, where there's more headwinds, and that's where you then realize, oh, I also need to find a way to balance myself. And I think everyone finds their own ways. Of course, there's things that a lot of people find the strength in family or sports or these kind of things. For me personally, there's a lot of practices like breath work or ice bathing and so on that literally have a physical, help me physically to balance myself and regulate my state, and also regulate my nervous system. That's something I've really integrated in a lot of my work, and that is something that is a practice that works really well for me, and can recommend everyone trying it as they go through these journeys. And I think everyone also needs to experience with their own ways of dealing with it. But I think it is really important, as you say, to and that's something which I only learned after a while, that in the first few years it always feels like, oh yeah, and then the next milestone, getting to 100 million, to 200 million, getting to the next valuation mark or the next fundraise and so on. And at some point, if you realize what you actually want to do here, which might be different for others, but for me was always, I want to build an enduring company that can exist for decades to come, be an independent company to grow. And if that's your intention, then you have to realize that, as you say, it's not chasing that next milestone, but it's really continuously figuring out, building the foundations, building an own mode for you as a founder that can continue to scale, build an organization that continues to scale. And all of these things, of course, are then things that don't just, you need to really reflect on, you need to figure out what works for you in that scale, and that is then what allows you to go much longer than if you always just think you need to chase that next funding round or whatever.
That's key. Maybe one quick one. Any advice for entrepreneurs in the audience? So
I think really, of course, the current times are incredibly exciting, and I still love my job, but I can also only imagine how is this right now for the people that are starting off in this current world and day and age. But I think still think about the problems you're solving from building it as a long-term play. I think Ilka was on stage here earlier talking about the type of companies we will need in Europe are companies that can exist in long term, that can build entire category leaders and so on, and not a company that quickly grows to 200-300 million, that gets acquired, and then it's never heard of again. So focus on problems that are big, focus on problems that can last and are relevant for the future, and then continue to put one step after the other and keep building for the type of companies we need here in Europe.
Great. Hanno, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for your attention, and have a good evening.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.